Hi there, and thank you for tuning into the Social Circus, where every week we dive into a variety of topics covering social media, mindset, and how to run your business. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Social Circus. My name is Sarah T, and I am your host. And today I'm excited to be joined by my very first guest. I'm pleased to introduce the fabulous Amanda Kendle.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very excited to be the first guest. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I have to say, I've had a girl crush on you for quite a long time. I've followed your podcast and I follow you on Instagram, and I absolutely love what you do. And I was pretty thrilled last year to have you as my lecturer while I was completing my master's degree, and I got to learn social media analysis from you.
Well, you were also a great student. I have to confess that now, but it was a really fun unit. So yeah, I'm glad you could be there.
I love that component of what we got to enjoy, which is that intellectual discussion in academia and chatting about some really fun and hot topics in social media. So that is one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on my podcast today.
Well, I'm very excited to be here, and I can't wait to talk more about podcasts. So yeah.
Brilliant. So for people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and also your background in terms of digital, because you've been around for a little while.
Well, I have. I'm really almost accidentally. So these days I run a social media and blogging consultancy. So I work with lots of small business owners. I lecture at Murdoch University. Among other things, I run workshops for lots of different clients. And I run my podcast and blog in the travel space. And the travel part is the important part because that's how it all started. So where are we up to now? 17 years ago, I started my blog, Not a Ballerina, because I was writing for magazines. That's how it began. I was writing articles for magazines, print, real physical magazines. And I wanted to
touch and feel.
Yes, remember those? And they still exist, but it was hard. It was a hard slog. And one of my editors suggested to me that, he had a mate, a pal, I guess he was in America, that wanted to hire a blogger and for their travel website. And I didn't know at the time what a blogger was, but he said a very important sentence he said was, they'll pay you every week. And I was like, oh, well, that's way easier than writing for a magazine. So I started blogging for someone else first. And then I thought, I should have my own blog, which is how I began my own travel blog. And over the time, I blogged for lots of other people. And as the social media platforms came on, those organizations would add those tasks to my job and other freelance writers' jobs. So, okay, you've written that, but now you also need to post it on social media, on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So I kind of got to explore all of the social media platforms as they arrived.
So cool.
Yeah,
so I guess for our listeners
easier.
who don't know, blogging was actually the original influencers, if people are not aware. So bloggers were the original influencers. This is how they wrote their content, and they got paid and sponsored with content. And so you were actually an early influencer, and you kind of did an amazing transition from blogging to social media, particularly Instagram, and then to having a really successful podcast, which I think is very cool.
Thank you.
And is that something, I guess, for a lot of us running a business, we don't often see the next step. We just take it and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly how I did everything. Because, especially in the early days, it wasn't very clear what was about to come up. I followed podcasting for quite a few years because I happened to work with a very experienced travel podcaster before anyone really listened to podcasts back in the very early days. And so I kind of had it on my radar for a long time, and I loved the idea of it. And I always had this idea that someday I would start a podcast.
So cool. And I think nowadays we almost take it for granted because podcasting is so entrenched. And obviously the most famous podcaster would have to be Joe Rogan, who has
certainly at the moment.
It's very controversial. But he has more viewers than the whole Fox News channel. And so that influence that he is able to garnish on other people is phenomenal. So from a podcasting perspective, tell us a little bit about your podcast as well. I'd love people to hear about that because it's very cool.
Oh, thank you. So I started the Thoughtful Travel podcast back 6 years ago. Yes, the time seems to be flying. So it arose out of my blog, but I really wanted to start something that people could listen to, because I think that it's a different relationship compared to reading or connecting with people in other ways. And I'd always loved to talk. I still love to talk. So sometimes it's a problem, but
Awesome.
I was really keen to start the podcast, and it's just gone from strength to strength ever since.
And so your podcast, in terms of like the Thoughtful Traveler, is really about, because I love travel, and pre-COVID, I love getting out, especially with my children and showing them the world. But your podcast really challenges us to take a different perspective on how we approach travel, which I love. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yes. So part of it happened by accident, because when I started my podcast, I had a small son and I was a single parent, and I thought I'm not actually going to be able to travel enough that I can run a regular destination podcast, which is kind of what all travel podcasts were at the time. So I thought I'm going to do something a bit different. And I've always thought that travel is so beneficial for us, like for, kind of a personal development perspective, as well as, what we can do for the world. I lived overseas for many years and learned so much from traveling that I thought I want to make sure that everyone knows how good traveling is. It's not just ticking off a bucket list and seeing a site. There's so many things we can learn from, getting to know other people, or, so many things. I could go on for, literally hours. So,
the good news is I'll pop in the show notes a link to your podcast so people can go and tune into that, because it is amazing. But obviously having a podcast for 6 years puts you in a category of people who have been doing this for quite a long time. Yeah,
it does. Yeah. And the consistency part is one of the key things to building up a podcast, I think, yet one of the hardest, because people can be very excited about starting a podcast, but it is quite a lot of work to keep showing up. I mean, I show up every week. I usually draw on interviews from 3 different guests for each episode, excuse me.
Wow.
And there's a lot of work, and you, of course, once you've published it, you need to promote it as well. But it's worth that consistency, because the connections that you build are so deep and long lasting compared to lots of other ways of connecting with people. So I have a Facebook group that is connected to the podcast, where I feel like it's a massive bunch of my friends, and some of them I have now met, some of them I will meet in the future, I'm sure of it, but it's just so connecting. And I know that they think they know me because they listen to me rabbit on, for, half an hour or so every week, which is, a lot.
It is a special relationship. And I think the nature of that human connection, in terms of you're in my ears and I'm listening to your voice, it does, when I listen to your podcast, I feel like, I could be sitting here having a cup of tea and you could be sitting opposite me. And I love that concept of feeling like you're connected to someone. So even though you'd never met me, I knew you.
And this happens a lot once you're a podcaster, and people do kind of chat to you about things that you certainly haven't told them, but they have heard you talk about them on the podcast. So, but Fantastic. I think the important part about a podcast is people are listening in their ordinary lives. Like, people will listen to a podcast while they're walking or at the gym or commuting, and so you actually are in their ears, in not just in their working life or something, but in a really kind of a more intimate part of their life. And that, I think, that really helps develop that connection as well.
Definitely. And we won't talk too much about the benefits of podcasts, because I think we could talk all day. But what I would love to talk about, because you've had lots of experience with this, is how do we pitch ourselves to be on a podcast?
I'm so glad you're asking this question, because I have been the recipient of many, many, many bad pitches for my podcast. So
so what makes a bad pitch is probably a great place to start.
Yeah, so there's lots of things that make a bad pitch. There's the obvious ones where the person who's pitching has really no clue about your podcast, where they've just found a list of relevant podcasts and are just shooting out all about them and why they're so good and why they should be on your podcast, with no regard for what's already been on the podcast before. Or in my case, so I have a quite specific format. And so if people kind of assume that they're just going to be a one-off interview, then I already know they've never listened to the podcast. So, the advice there is, find a podcast that you think you could be a guest on and listen to several episodes, not just one, because, even on mine, occasionally I have something different. It might be just me, or it might be one guest, but, listen to at least several, so you know the format and can therefore provide a sensible pitch. And I think the other important thing is to, and this applies especially in kind of business related podcasts, really make it clear what you can offer to the podcasters listeners. So what is, unique and special, and what's your what's your particular, your argument or your expertise or something that's actually, really unique and useful. So I think that's an important part. And don't be pitching them 3 or 4 times in the same week just because they haven't replied to you, because I get that too. I get these.
Oh, really?
Oh my goodness, yes. I get these slightly aggro follow-up emails saying, I haven't heard from you yet, like 2 days later. Like I get, 10 or 20 a day some days. And
wow.
Most of them I don't have time to read ever, to be fair. But, I'm certainly not replying to them all within a day. So
is the best way to pitch just to find out what your email address is and send you an email? And so I guess that the task is, how do I get you to open my email, is probably a good start.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've done is I've recently implemented a new system where I have pitching guidelines, and the pitching guidelines are really specific. And I now reply to random pitches with those guidelines so that people will pitch back appropriately, and even down to the subject line. And the first person who put the right subject line in, and their pitch was okay, like, similar to lots of others, but I thought, they're interesting enough, but they followed my guidelines and they put the right, so they did everything right. And I emailed back immediately. I said, you're the first person who's followed my guidelines. You're on no matter what. So, and
so that's a really good thing, because a lot of established podcasters do have on their website, interview, be a guest on my podcast, or ask me to be a guest. And so those, when they have those, we want to follow those to the letter.
Yes. So look for them, look for, podcast name guidelines, or, being a guest, search for that kind of stuff. And if you can do that, then that's already a good start. Or even just drop them a quick message, like perhaps on a social platform, to say, do you have any guidelines for pitching as a guest, or something like that? Start the connection that way. I must say, the other thing that I, when I do, because I have obviously like a lot of potential guests to choose from, and the travel space is full of interesting stories. I could probably produce a podcast episode every day if I had the time. There's enough stories out there. But I think the people who've made the effort to build a connection with me first, whether they're in my Facebook group, or they're following me on Instagram and they reply to something and build up a bit of a connection. And then, often over that time, I find, I've seen something they do and I ask, would you like to be a guest? Because I'd love you to tell that story, or something like that. Or they then come to me and I know who they are, and I think, then they're nice. Of course, I'd love to have them on. So build a connection first.
That's a great tip, because most of us have really good social media presences, and most of us are very active on our socials and have our own communities. So they are some brilliant tips. So just to wrap up, reach out to people through social media, join their community, and be active on their content, so that in an authentic way. Obviously, I think that's
absolutely
a given, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. We can see through it if it's not. But yeah.
And I think another good tip is really to talk about trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole, because my goal is I want to crack the American market. So I'm going to pitch to 50 American podcasters. Okay. And that's the kind of strategy that people go out with in their mind, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So bad strategy, obviously, but let's talk a little bit about how we make ourselves actually a round peg in a round hole. So not trying to pitch to people who don't match us.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You need to know your work and yourself well, and you need to know where you're pitching to well. And when the values align, then it's easy. So I can think of some of the people who've pitched to me, and it's dead easy to know that they're exactly right. In fact, with the podcasts that have started in the last couple of years that I think are really well aligned to me, I've gone out, and they've just been startup podcasts, but I've gone out to them and said, I love the work you're doing. Let's do something. Let's collaborate. And so, I've ended up, we've done, episodes that we put out on both of our channels and stuff like that. So,
brilliant.
If you can match up your round hole with the right round hole, then, also, in that authentic way, then everything is possible, because, most people, they want to share more good information about whatever their specialization is. I'm not actually like against sharing travel stories. It's just I need a filter. And so if I get 10 pictures in one day and most of them are I've self-published this book about this one trip I did, and so I would be a great guest for you, and I can talk about all of these things for an hour. Oh, that's a terrible pitch because it doesn't fit my round hole. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, such good tips. And one of the other interesting things is to think about what else you would like to talk about, because I think we get very focused, like, oh, in my business, I'm going to be launching next month my Facebook ads course. So I want to talk to everyone about Facebook ads, right? Because that's my like absolute solid focus. And what we're doing is really selling ourselves short, because people, and I think this is at the heart of good marketing, is that people want to connect with us as human beings. And so you need to be open to the opportunities that present themselves. So for me, I know that in my business, I've been interviewed on podcasts that have nothing to do specifically with my business, but because I have endometriosis and I've suffered a lot in my life with it and run a business around it and all those things, I really like talking about running a business with a chronic illness. And so I've been interviewed on multiple podcasts about that. And there's no space when you do that to pitch, oh, by the way, I do this.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's okay.
Yeah. And I know that lots of people have connected with me and said, I really loved hearing your story. I found it really inspiring and I think you're really cool. And those people will probably buy from me at some point. And I think we need to actually put our thought into what do I want to share that allows people to connect with me? So what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. So a quick case, a good example of that is, you know, I run a travel podcast and I talk about that nearly all the time. But part of my social media business is I run a social media summer school. So that was obviously last month in summer. And I had several people sign up who heard about it because they listen to my travel podcast and they follow me on social media. And occasionally I mention it on all of my social media. And they already, you know, they had the proper, really, you know, a quite high know, like, and trust factor. And so it was a very small jump for them to move me in their brains from travel podcaster to she can also teach me about social media. So, you know, to me, it seems like a big leap because it's two quite different things, but because they felt like they knew me so well, then that was like a no-brainer to them. So, I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but
I don't think that's a big leap. I do love your social media summer school. I think it is the coolest name. I do hope you have it trademarked because I think it's brilliant. But also I feel like once people get to know you and follow you on socials and they kind of go, oh, wow, this woman's been around for a long time and she has so much experience and so much knowledge, that I think a lot of people would probably buy anything from you.
Oh, that's such a lovely thing to say. Thank you. Maybe I'll start selling anything.
So on that vein, can we talk a little bit about the fact that you teach people to podcast as well?
Yes. So I was very lucky when I started my podcast that a friend of mine, Brooke McCallery, who runs the Slow Home podcast, still does to this day. She was starting a network at the time and she was starting with, 4 or 5 podcasts. And so I was like, oh, do you want to do a travel one? And she's like, yes. And so she did all the hard stuff for me at the beginning. And over the time, I've realized that had been a barrier for me. I had the idea of starting a podcast for ages, but that initial barrier, there is quite a lot of tech knowledge that you need to figure out at the beginning and quite a lot of decisions to make, you know, which host and which this, and it's quite a difficult thing to begin at the beginning. And so that's why I started my podcast incubator groups so that we could kind of, pigs. Because you've got to have pigs. My son loves pigs. And as soon as I realized that acronym would fit, I was like, oh my goodness, my son can do all my marketing for this because he's obsessed with pigs.
Brilliant.
And and so I think that helping hand to get people through that initial part is really important. After that, a podcast becomes easy. It becomes still a fair bit of work, but once you know all of that initial stuff, it's relatively easy. But I felt it's quite a barrier, so that's what I've been doing.
So you get people to come and join you it's a course online, and we get through that initial phase of learning all the tech, understanding all of the tech and what, like you say, there are lots of decisions to be made. And then I can kind of, you know, get my little training wheels and I'm off.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm imagining that you've had some gorgeous success stories through that too, people finding like, I did it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So very, very exciting once they actually launch. So very all people who say, I've been meaning to do it for ages, but you know, just that helping hand really helps. So it's not hard, it's just a lot at once. And if someone else can tell you a lot of it instead of having to find out yourself, then it just makes it a lot easier.
Oh, definitely. And I will definitely, for everyone listening, pop in the show notes the link to Pig as well. I just want to say it because it's fun. Not very going up.
I think no. Oh, I'm the one who started it, so don't you worry. I think it's important to still be able to have fun even when we're working. So
definitely. And also I love the whole notion of having fun when we're doing stuff that feels quite hard. So doing tech stuff feels hard. And I'm really blessed in my business that my husband is the tech. And so all of that stuff he does, and I just kind of be the face, which is super fun.
Lucky.
I know. So just to kind of wrap up, because it's been really lovely to talk to you about your wealth of experience in podcasting and in social media. In terms of pitching, if there's one piece of advice you could give to someone as a sort of wrap up, what do you think you would like to say to people? Like, I'm going to pitch, I want to get myself out there. What's the one thing I could be doing better or doing well?
So I know I mentioned it before, but I can't overstate it. Understand the podcast you're pitching to. Make it clear in your pitch that you are really familiar with the format and how your story or whatever it is that you want to share will fit into that. That's by far the most important part.
Oh, fantastic. Look, Amanda, thank you so much for giving up your valuable time today to hang out with me and all my listeners and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I'm certain that they've all enjoyed it. And as I mentioned, I will connect in the show notes all the links so you can come and follow Amanda, tune into her podcast, join her little incubator, which is super fun, and hopefully your group as well. So thank you, Amanda, for your time today. It's been delightful.
Oh, no worries, Sarah. It's been fabulous. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for tuning in to The Social Circus. As your host, Sarah Thompson, I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend your time hanging out with me. I would be so grateful if you could spare an extra moment to go and leave me a review on your favourite podcasting platform. And if you even felt more excited, you could share my podcast with your friends who you think would get great value from it. Thanks so much again for tuning in.